you're sitting way in the back, you might want to just move up a little bit closer because we don't have too many of us here right now. And we're glad that we have the Molsee family with us, who are missionaries in Togo, West Africa. And we've been supporting you for about 5 years now, is it? 4 or 5 years, yeah. So we're glad to have them with us, and they're going to have the Sunday school hour and the church hour. And we're just going to turn the whole hour over to Ethan, and he's going to come and share with us his ministry, their ministry there. And then later on in the church service, they're going to be sharing again from God's word and also about their ministry. Let's begin with prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity that you've given us this morning to be in your house. And we do pray, Lord, that you would guide and direct in our meetings today as the Molsees come and share with us. We pray, Father, that you would use them in touching our hearts and minds about the ministry that they have there so that we might better pray for them and encourage them in their work. So we want to commit this hour to you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you. It's good to be with you guys. Set my coffee on the ground here. It's probably not legit to have coffee in here. Is it fine? It's fine. You're fine. Turn my little clicker on. Everybody has their coffee. Excellent, excellent. Maybe you'll be paying attention then. How many teenagers do we have here today? Raise your hand if you're a teenager. Oh, yeah, right. Some of you guys are just teenagers in spirit. There are some legitimate teenagers here. So here you go. We're going to start early on. I have some quiz slides, and so we're going to make the teenagers answer those, see if anybody gets it correct, because it's just embarrassing if the adults get it wrong, which we would. Well, that's us today. Like Mr. Weber or George said there, we actually were here 5 years ago, and there was just 2 kids with us at that point. In fact, I think we have, whoops, there's our quiz. We have to do that later. So right now, we left, and I'll go over some of this in Sunday morning as well. My goal this morning in Sunday school is to give you just a brief glimpse of our life and our ministry in Togo. We'll talk more about some of it in church, but at the end, I hope to have enough time that if there's any questions, you can ask them. Hopefully they would pertain to Togo, because otherwise I'll just be sarcastic and rude. Okay, so that's us. We're the Molsees. There's Aaron. He's the oldest. He's 10 years old now. Eli is 8. He's in the maroon there. Figure out my little clicker. So that's Eli. We have Aiden here, and Ezra, the serious thinker there. Ezra was born in France while we were in language school, and we left for language school when Aiden was 6 months old. So most of those 2 are probably new to most of you guys, and you've seen them through pictures. Here's our quiz. We are from Togo. What is the size of the Togo? The size of the U.S., the size of Texas, the size of Washington, or 1/3 the size of Washington? What do you think? 1/3 the size of Washington. You guys think he's right? Yeah. You don't really care. Sounds good? He's smarter than most people. That is correct. It's D. 1/3 the size of Washington. What country borders Togo? Benin, Nigeria, Nicaragua, or Canada? Yes. Benin. Have you been in Togo? Oh, okay. Wow, you're good. That's good. Is he homeschooled? Oh, man. That always is the case. I was public schooled, so I didn't know most of these answers till I moved there. So. Excellent job. Okay, Washington's population is roughly 7.3, 7.8 million. What's the population of Togo? 1 million, 40 million, 7.5 million, or 10 million? You're on a roll. Do you want to keep answering? You're guessing 4 million? It's actually the C there. You're really close, but it's C, 7.5 million. So basically, Togo is 1/3 the size of Washington State, and it has roughly the same population. So gives you an idea of our population. Our length, because Togo is like this long, skinny country. I think I have a picture of it here. Oh, I have another quiz question. What's Togo's most important cash crop? My wife didn't even know this when I first put it in here, because there's a couple tricky ones in here. Peanuts, coffee, tobacco, or cotton? Yes. Tobacco, he thinks. Any other ideas? That's peanuts is a good guess. You know, actually, it is cotton, yes. Peanuts, they raise a lot of peanuts around us, so that is an important crop as well. Tobacco, I don't think I've seen much tobacco in Togo, just because it's kind of a luxury crop. Cotton, though, there's a lot of that grown, and then coffee, there's some of that grown, but honestly, it's terrible. So our first time we visited Togo, we came back with these little bags of Togolese, or coffee grounds that had been roasted in Togo at a monastery not far from the Southern Hospital. There's 2 hospitals in Togo that ABW runs, and we gave a bunch of it out as gifts. Thank you for sending us to Togo, and then we tried some. We're like, oh, this is terrible coffee. But, okay, well, there's us. Not too long before we left, Aaron and Eli at that point. This is one of our trips. We used to go a couple years in a row there out to Mount St. Helens right after Labor Day and pick huckleberries. And so that is what we actually came back from. This last week, we've been down at Mount St. Helens picking huckleberries for 3 or 4 days and just getting our roughing it on. So we currently live in a 30-foot travel trailer. We're going to try this for the entire year. So we'll let you know how our relationships are after that and how we're doing. But so far, it's going really good. We moved into a travel trailer in May when we came home. We'll be in there until May when we leave next year. We've made one trip back to the East Coast. It was about a month long because we had some meetings in the East Coast and some people, supporters and churches to visit and presentations to do. But it went really well. So that has been a challenge and kind of exciting. We're basically what's that called? Little houses, tiny house movement. There you go. We move also. There we are today, the 4 of us, 4 kids and us. Megan is from Boise, Idaho. She actually made the trip back east with us, and she's a school teacher who actually originally we went to present at Whitney Baptist Church in Boise, Idaho, and their pastor's a friend of mine. He had nobody that would host us for the night, so he called up Megan and said, Megan, would you mind hosting the Molsees? And she's like, oh, sure. And she's a single lady, and she's a school teacher. And she's like, okay, I am, but I got to do some stuff tonight so they can let themselves in. Well, we met Megan there, and we just kind of in passing mentioned, oh, it'd be really nice if God ever laid it on your heart to be a school teacher in Togo. We desperately need school teachers. And about a year later, she called us and said, you know what, I've been thinking about that. Are you guys really serious about that? And we're like, yeah. And so Megan actually came out to Togo and spent 2 years as a school teacher. And so we had a lot of fun with having Megan out, but the more exciting thing is she's now leaving next month for France or Switzerland where she'll learn French, and she's coming out full-time now, and so she'll be a full-time school teacher with us. A great just reminder, I think anybody can do missions. If God puts it on your heart, you can do it. Her first month or 2 there, pretty much everybody on our team kind of whispered behind her back saying, don't you dare offer to take her to Lome, the capital where the airport is, because I'm pretty sure she would never, ever come back. And so Megan was not offered any rides out of town because she was ready to leave. But that's not uncommon. I mean, we actually don't go to the capital but maybe twice a year. So, but Megan really, it grew on her. We didn't keep her there against her will. She could have gone if she wanted to. But there's a bunch of the school kids out there. So we have a big team, and these are a bunch of the kids out there right now. This year that this picture was taken, there was actually 3 school teachers. Aunt Kelly, who's a career missionary, Megan, who's going back as career, and Amanda, who just finished up this year a 2-year commitment, and she has now also committed to go back full-time. So we will have hopefully 2 or 3 teachers out there at all times, which is good because we got kids all the way from kindergarten or preschool all the way up to 12th grade. One of our trips this summer took us by the Ark Museum, or the Ark exhibit in Kentucky, and there we found this display. It said the red dots on the sign signify locations where people groups where there's less than 2% Christianity. And if you look real hard, you can actually see Togo right there, and there is Mongo, one of those red dots. Less than 2% of our population are Christians. Well, there's Togo. If you want to arrive in Togo, you would leave Seattle, and you'd probably fly directly, if you could, to Paris, and then you hop on an airplane and fly directly to Lome. So 12 hours or so to Paris, 8 to 10 hours to Lome, and voila, you would arrive at our only capital that has, or the only city that has a large airport down here, Lome on the port. And there's one major highway north and south because a lot of the goods that go into other parts of West Africa come up through the port there in Lome. It's a deep sea port. Excuse me. So down here in Lome, you'd get off the airplane, and it's going to be late enough in the day. You cannot make the 8 to 10 hour trip north at that point, so you would spend the night. Togo, as I mentioned, is a long, skinny country. Basically, it's the distance from the border, like Blaine area in Washington, down to Eugene, Oregon. So it's skinny, and at the narrowest part here, how wide was the narrowest part? 30-ish miles right here. So Melissa someday wants to organize a run across Togo. We're going to call it the Benin is on this side and Ghana on this side, so I said we should call it the Ben Gon or something. I don't know. But we might do that. You might have to come out and run 30 miles across the country. Well, before you leave town, you want to get your passport taken at the passport photo place. That's where you find it. That's in Lome at the Capitol. It's just a line up by the street. That's the most professional place you can find. So there you go. We had to get our passports updated, and there's the photo. You want to be careful on the roads. They're pretty dangerous. There are accidents every day. This road has old trucks on it and people that should never be driving. This actually was a football team, soccer team from just north of us, and they had people from a number of different countries. I took this picture because on Thursdays, every Thursday, I go to one of the villages and do village ministry with one of our chaplains. We're trying to start churches in a lot of the small villages. And so as we were leaving town, the 2 days before, we had 25 patients all arrive at the same time. And it was this bus had crashed. Basically, they blew a tire, they toppled off the road, and someone said, well, it's no wonder they crashed. Their steering wheel's down here. But that probably happened afterwards. No, the bus, though, brought in a whole bunch of patients all at once, and it was wonderful to see our hospital staff. And Melissa, I think, was working in clinic that day, and she popped into the hospital, and everybody else that could kind of came through. And I think by 11 o'clock that night, we had worked through all 20 some of those patients, and only 4 of them were serious ones ended up staying. So a good time. There's a funny story from that because there's a young man, and he's moaning, and I'm not terribly medical. I used to be an EMT, but I can tell moaning and pain when I see it. So I walk through the hospital, and he's moaning, and I'm like, there needs to be a doctor over here. Somebody needs to see this guy. And one of our other doctors, who's very loud, she yells across the way, don't pay him any attention. He's just faking it. He's not hurt. And I'm like, okay. And then he looks up at me, and he's like, I speak English. I'm like, oh, sorry about that. So most times, so football players, sometimes they're from like Ghana, next door does speak English. So oops. Most of our patients have had great things to say after their stay at the hospital. Well, along the way on the road, you would meet trucks like this one, which this one is actually a truck full of prayer mats, so Muslim prayer mats. This one's tall enough that probably had someone that rode all the way from Lome up to Mongo and passed us on the top of this with a stick so he could raise the power lines and things over the load. Which if you see some of the taxis, actually it's not a terrible way to drive, I don't think, because that's not one of the taxis. That's actually my van, just to show you that there is hazards on the road all the time. These Toyota vans are pretty hardy, but unfortunately, I think it's an engineering flaw. The front left and the front right corner bottoms, one has the radiator on it, the other one has the air conditioner. So if you hit something too hard, you're going to take out one or the other. Thankfully, we were in the middle of nowhere on this one, and this man was less than 30 minutes away, and he somehow came and fixed my radiator, which had punched a hole in it. And to this day, I haven't actually replaced my radiator. He did some magic with it. They don't need cattle trucks there. You just have a Corolla station wagon, and there's a bull right there. There's his horns. And there's a guy right here sitting right behind him to keep him nice and snug in there. So you actually got passengers. You got the driver up front, but then you also have passengers in the second seat, and this guy's all crumpled in the back. So I don't know how they load him in, but they do. And good theological reminders along the way also. Man, no be God. Good reminder. So, good theology, bad English. In town, this is another accident that happened. Probably shouldn't have, but some of our Christians, we chastised them or said, don't be doing this, but they kind of celebrated when the bus ran into the mosque. They're like, that's Jesus showing them. No. So we have many Muslim employees, and we had to remind our Christians that you work beside them, so please be kind. This is a taxi. These little vans, I think, were probably meant for 11 or 12 people, and they usually had no less than 18 or 20 people inside. You see people riding on top, and that's because, yes, they can get more people, but honestly, if you're crammed in there with 18 or 19 people and people are on people's laps, it's much more comfortable on top. Well, our life in Togo, honestly, is not that different from your life here. And so we want to remind you again, you guys have pets, our kids have pets. They've never had a dog or a cat, but Aaron's had like 5 or 6 chameleons at a time. What else has he had? Bizarre things. 2 pythons. An owl. Not all at the same time. They kind of all come and go. Once we had like 5 or 6 chameleons, he decided it was too much work to collect bugs for chameleons, so they all got released. And then he got a snake, and then an owl. We had an owl there for a while, and yeah, who knows what. So we have a little cage on the porch. They're not allowed in the house, thank goodness. And that's a good thing because sometimes his pets do get free somehow. Well, you saw our boys this morning in their little green shirts, similar to this one. This is actually where they went. This young man is a friend of mine, and he sewed all their shirts. So you go in there, he measures you up and sews up your shirt and calls you when they're done. It's actually a pretty efficient way. You guys, so you guys have to, I don't know, maybe don't get clothes made. I guess you go and buy them. So there you go. That's our Ross or something like that, I guess. There you go. This is the Safeway Meat Market or Winco or whatever. There's your meat. You want to buy it in the morning because there's no refrigeration, and it's pretty hot out. So make sure you grab your meat early. There you go. The vegetable aisle. You guys have one? We have one. There you go. Winco Bulk Foods, right? Or Fred Meyer Bulk Foods. See, it's all the same. This would be Joanne Fabrics, right? There you go. And of course, Panera Bread. Once again, you're not sure who's touched the bread, so make sure you run it through the fire to make sure it's nice and sanitized before you take a crunch out of it. And you guys have laundromats. They have laundromats. Unfortunately, their laundromat's about 200 yards up from where the city takes all the water into the town to give us all water, but oh well, could be worse. And of course, moving cattle, all kinds of products. There's 2 goats up on top of this one. Is very common. You just see people loaded to the hilt. You have a gas station, a Texaco. We have a Texaco. You don't see any pumps here. Actually, you see an old pump here, but that has been disconnected and it no longer works. Now you can just buy a whiskey bottle of gas out front because it's cheaper to haul that across the Ghana border and not pay taxes. So there you go. We do have actually legitimate pumps in town, and so we usually buy our gas from the legitimate pumps because you're never also sure how much they've stretched this gas and what they've used to stretch it with. But if I'm out on my motorcycle, I can go through a full tank of gas sometimes on one of my trips, and then I will have to stop and buy this and pray it all works out. Public schools there, public schools here, they all need money. There you go. So I don't think their levy passed. That's elementary and middle school combined there. If you go inside, this is what you're seeing there. Sometimes it's quite interesting because they'll leave the lesson up, and there's sometimes very, very detailed and actually high-level learning that's going on. Like, well, what's an example? Because they were doing anatomy one time with great detailed drawings. Yeah. So kids that can afford to go to school usually go at least through 5th to 8th grade, somewhere in there, and then a lot of people drop out at that point. Yeah, it's kind of a drastic change here, but our kids, of course, with the missionary library out there, there's a lot of English books that have been sent out to them, so thanks to all the people that worked hard to gather things for the students. There's a standard clinic in Togo. It's a cement building. We've been to so many of these now. Melissa and I, twice a month, try to get on our motorcycle and find someone to watch the kids, and it's kind of our outing to get off compound and kind of discover some of the villages that our patients come from. And sometimes we try to meet up with patients that have been discharged and see how they're doing, and sometimes we just hit the roads and see where they take us. And so this is a very common clinic you would find. A cement room or building, most times no doors. There's a labor and delivery area and almost no supplies in there. They're very sad situations in some cases. We came to a village where there was a man, he looked so haggard, and he's a state-paid nurse, and this town has, well, it's not huge, but thousands of people, probably 3,000 or 4,000 in the general area. And he was the only state-paid nurse running the clinic. And you're supposed to be a midwife there also to deliver babies. But she got up, he said, in the middle of the night and somehow tripped, fallen, and broken both of her wrists. So in this Muslim culture, this man who's a nurse was actually responsible not just for medical emergencies in his area now, but he was also delivering all of the babies. And so you'll find that very common. And he was saying, oh, please, find some way to help us because I'm paid the same as a nurse who works in Lome, our capital, and just works 8 hours a day, and I'm working 7 days a week and 24 hours a day. And frequently, their paychecks from the government just don't come for 3 or 4 months, and then sometimes they'll catch up, and they're always behind. And so the whole government and the healthcare there is really quite a mess most times. You have fast food. I have fast food on my days when I'm out in the villages. This is a common meal for me to grab at the market. It's got some beans and spaghetti-looking stuff there, a hard-boiled egg, and a little bit of meat. And I usually go with one of our chaplains, and he's really good at saying, no, he needs actually not that piece of meat, because you will see like the whole nose of a cow like floating on top of the sauce. You're like, oh, no thanks. But good times. You need a minivan? I don't need a minivan. I just use the motorcycle. I can get all 4 boys on the motorcycle. when mom's working and she's not there to say, wear your helmets and your shoes and a bunch of other stuff. No, we weren't going far. I think we actually rode just down to our guest house from our house to borrow a movie or something, and somebody snapped this photo. But not next furlough, we probably won't be able to show a picture like this because I don't think they will all fit on there at that point. Saturday mornings, I mentioned, we try to get out in the villages and take a little ride, and most times it works out well. Sometimes we end up stuck or broke down, but a great way for us to go out and connect with some of our old patients. If Togolese people are so thankful for the hospital's ministry, that is it's not terribly uncommon. There's been a few times that we've stopped by a village and I'll end up having to ride home with a chicken that's been a gift for us, which is, I'm supposed to be very grateful, but every time I'm like, oh no, I don't want to carry a chicken on the motorcycle. So a few times I've said, Melissa, can we just like get out of town and ditch it? And she's like, you know, someone could see that and that'd be bad, but I hate driving on a motorcycle. You usually drape the chicken because they tie their legs together. You drape the chicken over your handlebar so it just kind of flops along for the next hour. Strangely, they survive. And sometimes we break down. There's my motorcycle being put onto the top of my AAA called car here. It's a taxi. Just waved it down as it came by, and they threw the motorcycle on top, and I'm like looking to make sure they're not scratching my motorcycle, but least of my concerns. Sometimes Melissa does not trust my driving when she sees a large pool of water and thinks, where's the bottom? And so she says, you know what, I'll just wade through here, which is a pretty brave thing because this water could contain a lot of different things. So usually she wades through, and sometimes one of the Togolese kids will walk with her to show her the path that's least deep, and I usually just try to plow through with my motorcycle. It's not uncommon to be over the seat on your motorcycle. As long as you keep going, you can keep some bass under you, you can make it to the other side. So rainy seasons like that, and then you'll come to parts of the road. This is actually a road here. During rainy season, though, about a mile of it is completely flooded. In this case, we have to pay $1 to put our motorcycles. There's two of them. That's Melissa's brother, Corey, who came to visit us, and I. And we put our motorcycles onto the boat, and they take us to the other side, where the road comes back out. So we have wildlife. You have wildlife. Hippos are our friends. They're not too far from us. About 2 miles out, there's a hippo pond that has 20 or 30 hippos. That's the extent of our wildlife. Anybody here from Masters College or ever gone to Masters College? You guys know what Masters College is, right? Okay, well, she's always looking at me like, what are you going to say? Well, we had this wonderful group out from Masters College. What was that young man's name? David. He's from the Northwest, actually. And so David took some great pictures, which I am profiting from, but I tell you, I was on the other ridge saying, David, get back! As David said, oh, I want to get a little closer to get a good picture. And so he got some great pictures of these hippos coming out of the water, but he was way too close. If you read hippo books, they move much faster than you think when you look at them. So since leaving the hospital, actually, we left in May, there's been at least one hippo death. So there's actually, these ponds also have a lot of fishermen out there, so they try to bring their nets across, and I've seen them out there trying to shoo the hippos away so they can get their nets around them. So it's actually quite amazing. We've not had more accidents. If you ever wondered what a hippo track looked like, that's a hippo track right there. There's one behind them too, so those are kind of fun. We have all kinds of bugs, and our boys love bugs. We are blessed with adventurous boys, so we have a lot of fun out there. There's one of the men fishing with a casting net. They also have nets they drag across the rivers, and they all basically are getting these small fish about the size of sardines, which they will dry, and they emit a wonderful aroma at the market as you walk through. So, but it's better than the grubs. This is a pile of grubs. It's a basin about this big, and these grubs are about 4 inches long. You could also get those and throw those in your sauce to surprise company. Well, we have lots of Muslim holidays, and our town is a Muslim town, so there's certain holidays, Tabaski and others, when there's the stench of hair of goats singed off that lingers all day long. But we profit from Ramadan, because in Ramadan they make Ramadan donuts, and if you like onion rings, you would love Ramadan donuts. They're basically this doughy mixture that tastes like an onion ring without the onion, and they serve it with this spicy red sauce. And so we celebrate Ramadan by going to the donut lady, who's only there during Ramadan, because as the men break their fast at the end of the day, they love these little treats from Ramadan, and we partake in those as well. So here the boys are all waiting for their Ramadan donuts, which are being fried in this pot of grease here and scooped off into usually a cement. After they make cement, they have the paper cement bags which have numbers of layers to them. And so they will take those layers then, and they'll put these donuts onto a big chunk of that and fold it up and give it to you. Everything's reused out there. That's something you realize quickly. Now, this is a hard slide for me because I always get it mixed up. I'm not supposed to say this is my cotton picking wife. This is my wife picking cotton. That's right. Just joking. No, it's to remind us that the work that goes into Togo's main crop. Cotton is a very labor-heavy job. This is a truck being filled with cotton. This man has harvested cotton and put it into his little shed there. Melissa was out. Do we have a picture of that? I don't. Melissa was out on one of our drives, and we came across these Fulani ladies. They're nomadic ladies with the Fulani tribe, and they had been hired to plant cotton in a man's field. So he, of course, was sitting in the shade observing their work, and so I, as a man, sat with him and talked about their work. And Melissa went out and actually tried their work. And so, yeah, for one full day, out in the hot, hot sun, just planting cotton, we discovered they earned basically $1, equivalent of $1 for a full day's work, and that's just one reminder of the hard life and the hard work that goes into life out there. Yes, sir? No, he's not. I'm sorry. It does look like that, but I think it's my photography magic. Yeah, it's inside the barn or the silo thing. It'd make a better story if he was, though, wouldn't it? We see so many people, like huge loads on their heads. There was a lady, and it's funny because I was actually out at the front of the hospital. We have a big area where at the entry, where sometimes this last year there's been as many as 300 or 400 people waiting to get into the hospital. So every day they go through and they triage and they say which one's the most urgent, and after that, who's been here the longest. And I remember sitting there with our Togolese physician assistant as he was sorting through these patients, and he asked this lady, "What is your problem?" or "What's your complaint today?" And she says, "I have very, very bad neck pain." And he explained to her, "Well, your head is not for carrying weight." And all the men around her just erupted in laughter, saying, like, that's the stupidest thing they'd ever heard. Oh, of course, she's a woman. She has to carry loads on her head. And so then he's like, "Well, have you ever thought about getting a cart or a wheelbarrow or something like that?" And once again, they all laughed. They're like, "Oh, she could never get married if she starts pushing a cart, if people don't think she can carry loads on her head." And it's very sad. That's the situation there, is the women really do a ton of the manual labor. And they come in frequently, and I think all the doctors are frustrated because many times their first complaint is what? All over body pain, like, "I just hurt everywhere." And doctors are like, "How do we cure that?" But it really is. That's what their problem is. They've worked so hard for so many years that everything just hurts. And children, at a very young age, if they're not in school, in the villages especially, they'll be out plowing fields. These kids were our kids' age, and they were out plowing up the field. Everything's includes a lot of work. That's rice being whacked till the wet rice comes out. And water. Water is such a necessity in all parts of Africa. Villages that have a functioning well, it makes a huge difference to have clean water source. I've been in villages where I've been offered water to drink, and I know where it came from. It's just the river across the hill, and it's literally like mud brown, and they bring it out to you, and that's what they're all drinking, and you realize then why many of them are sick. This is actually one of our hospital employees. His name is Luke. He came from the Tamburma village. That's the people that build these type of homes. They're actually very interesting. They sleep on the top on the hot season. They have animals in the bottom sometimes. These tops here come off in their little silos that they fill with grain. But out in front here, you'll see these pedestals. See all these little bumps here, these pedestals here. These are all basically idols to ancestors or spirits. And so very commonly there will be a chicken or something on top of them. And the kids are so used to them, they just kind of play around them and do things. But just a reminder how frail life is and how lost so many people are, because they live in fear of so many spirits, so many things that might happen to them, the spells that could be placed on them. And then in this case, we went to a man's funeral, and he's being taken back across the river where his funeral was. And it was just a sad event in a lot of ways, because there really was no hope there. At his funeral, there's the village witch doctor who was there to help the family determine what the spirits required of his death. And when the family found out it was some small animal and not something big that had to be sacrificed, they were very thankful. And then to see the people line up at the funeral and seek out his advice for money, of course, on different issues in their lives, and hope for a positive outcome. It was just a reminder of how lost and how desperate people really are for any type of hope. Well, our hospital ministry There's the Hospital of Hope from the air. I am the lucky owner of a drone nowadays, so if I ever... No, I'm pretty careful, and I keep in good contact with the military base right across the street, which you're never supposed to take photos of. So this is the military base right here. So I should be able to keep my drone for a while, hopefully. But one of our nurses brought it out, and then later we realized the drone is prohibited in Togo, but the military commander has seen me out using it. I usually use it for promotional videos and stuff like this. But this is the hospital compound. We live back on this side, down below us on the bottom here. There's right now 4 houses down there, 5 houses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 houses actually, and 2 more on the way. So basically, our goal is people on the hospital compound would just be people that are on-call people. So we have a on-call phone in our house, and we can be called at any time for medical reasons, or many times I get called up for very bizarre reasons. But this is the hospital. So entryway is here. This is the guard shack, and people gather here on normal days to be seen. You come into the hospital, and this is the clinic building where you can see a doctor as just a walk-in patient, and then if it's more urgent, you'd be moved back to the hospital proper back here, or the OR and surgery areas here. Other buildings, we have the morgue here. You'll see solar panels here. This is the administration offices where my office is as well. A big shop, and then all of our containers. As we bring containers in, we haven't sold any of the old ones off yet, and many of those are used for storage for long and short term. We have a guest house and then a number of houses out there as well. We got there in time for Melissa to begin teaching our nurses aid class with a couple other people. So our nurses had been going through a nurses training program at our Southern Hospital run by Sharon Rahili, who used to be a professor at Cedarville, who now runs our nurses education. And so she raised up basically a team of 18 nurses that were trained in the Southern Hospital that were going to come up and help us open the hospital. Our nurses aides were people that most of them were transitioned from other positions in the hospital. As the hospital was constructed for 2 or 3 years, we had a whole bunch of masons and just day labor workers. And some of those that showed a lot of potential were asked to stay on, and we found other jobs for them, including some of them became nurses' aides. So Melissa had the opportunity to help teach some of them. Our kids got to be dummies as they took vitals and figured out how to do that, and that was fun. Who was that? Is that Aiden? That's Ezra, okay. Early on, this was our first hospital team, so we have 120 Togolese employees right now who work in the hospital. Most of them are Muslim. We began our hospital, opened it with 10 U.S. trained nurses who had all committed to 1 year or some of them 2 years of service. A huge help because our 18 Togolese nurses were all brand new. They'd never served as full-time nurses, so then we brought trained U.S. nurses out as well. And so those are a couple of our trained U.S. nurses. I mentioned at the front gate, this is Melissa taking vitals. Many times you have to wait out there to see people. They wait for days. This is a special number, actually, on his number here. So everybody that comes in gets a number. And you have a little medical history booklet that the patient keeps with themselves. And so at the end of the first year, we had seen 15,000 people. So 15,000 different people had come through. Some of those people came 2 or 3 times. But we just kind of looked at ourselves and said, wow, that's a lot of people. At the end of year 2, I think we were up at 27,000 people. So that's separate people. This is what our pediatric area looks like at nighttime when all the mamas are sleeping out here and babies are in the cribs there. Who's this? This is Gracie. Do you want to talk a little bit about this one? Do we have time? Yes, we do.
So,
Unless you're going to take a half hour, which we don't.
So Gracie was a little premature baby that came to the hospital around 30 weeks or so. She was born, her mom had some issues, and so Gracie came to our hospital around when she was about 29, 30 weeks. She was born at that time, and so she was a premature baby. Her mom had some issues, and her grandma really took good care of her. Gracie was with us for a number of weeks until she got strong enough to go back to her village. Her village is predominantly Muslim, and was a village where the gospel had never been preached before. People had not heard about Jesus. And through the time that her grandmother was at the hospital and at Gracie's bedside, she heard the gospel. She saw the Jesus film twice a day, and she really started asking some questions and started believing. And And so the day that she was released, there was a lot of work put into her by the nurses and physicians and our chaplains, and everybody loved Gracie. And so when she was discharged, there was nurses would go out and make visits in her village. The chaplains would go out, and there was a small Bible study being started in her village, kind of as a result of Gracie and then another surgery patient that was there. A couple months later, Gracie had been growing and making her milestones, and I was working in clinic, and I got a call to come to the reception area urgently, and so I ran down there and I looked, and it was Gracie, and Gracie was not doing well, and so I grabbed her and ran for the ER, and grandmother behind me, and got her back there, called the doctors who were on call at the hospital that day, called the chaplains because Gracie was struggling. They worked on her for a couple hours, and Gracie passed away. And that was really hard for a lot of us because we had gotten to know that family and her, and you just think, God, what was the purpose here? And so our chaplains took Grandma and Gracie's body back to her village and asked permission of the elders in her village, Muslim elders, and if they could do a funeral for Gracie, which usually babies, they usually kind of get buried in a cornfield, and there's not really a big ceremony for it because babies die so frequently. And so they said, no, that would be okay. And actually 30 of the Muslim elders in that village attended that funeral. And the gospel was preached carefully and with sensitivity, but was presented. And that village Bible study right now is over 100 people, including some of those elders that were there. And so even though Gracie's life was very short, we do know that the reason for that health care is to see these villages with Bible studies, with churches that are growing. And so, we just have to keep that in mind, even on the days where you walk home and you're so discouraged because you just feel like you just failed, that you realize that God's doing something greater.
And I mentioned that group of nurses that were with us for a year or 2 years. Death than they would usually ever see in their entire career in the U.S. Very sad moments along the way, but then there's triumphant moments as you see some successes along the way as well. Like Melissa mentioned, this village where this baby's from is Fare is what it's called. One of our chaplains actually has a really huge heart for Fare because he's from there. And so when Gracie was struggling, he's the guy that kind of took charge. He's the one that basically led the funeral service. He's the one now that's organizing our weekly visits with one of our missionaries. One of us always goes out there, but we're not leading. It's this chaplain who's leading that. His name is Ancien. And so that village Bible study, they're working chronologically through the Bible. That started with 14 people, something like that. And every week now there's more than 100 people there. And so that's the exciting part. We have an opportunity to see so many villages that have been opened up because of the hospital's ministry. I say frequently, I think the Hospital of Hope is the biggest tool in all of West Africa for church planting right now. In 2 years we've been out there, we've had 18 different village Bible studies now started. Some of those are small, 7, 15 people. One of them, that one is 100. One of the other ones graduated to a church, and it's 60-some when I went out to the church installation service. A lot of ways to go still, because a lot of those honestly will just fall apart. We've had a number of them get excited, ask us out. We get partway through the study, harvest time comes, they go off to their planting, and they don't seem to have a lot of desire to start the study back up. So honestly, we just move on because we always have a list. Like right now, there's a huge list. Villages that want us to come, and we don't have enough people. So I'm going to try to send people where we know people want to hear the gospel. We have a Saturday, there's a couple missionaries that started this kids program on the hospital compound also, where we invite 60 Togolese kids to come on in, and we it's led by Yalvi, our head nurse. This is Yalvi. He has a heart for kids, and so he leads this kind of a Wana time. They do games, they do different things, but there's always a Bible lesson he teaches at the end. And it's a great opportunity for a lot of our missionary kids to just go and mingle with them, but also to help out. The older teenagers are involved in planning games and things like that. So it's a way for the missionary kids to also have some ownership in our work out there. This is a class of nurses, which we have selected from the north for our next nursing class, because those 10 U.S. nurses have all gone home now, and we're really short on nursing staff. So we selected 16, 18 new people to be trained actually at the Hospital of Hope as nurses. So Sharon Rahili, who runs the Southern program, is also doing 2 programs now. And so she's doing one for us up north, and then she's running one down south. We have 2 classes going. This is exciting because almost everyone you see in this picture are Muslim men or women. There was 1 or 2 Christians in this class was all. We accepted applications. We received over 600 applications for these 18 positions because there's so few jobs in Togo. We have a pile like that high of just the folders with all people's information in it. It became overwhelming. We weeded it down to 60 or 80, I believe it was, and then selected the 18. Our goal really early on, as the hospital team met, they said, we want to see at least half of this class as Christians. But it just became impossible to find that many Christians where we're at that knew the local languages, because that was really what we're looking for. Know the local languages and be academically able to do the program. It's hard. And so we ended up with 18 mostly Muslim men and women. And so our prayer is that these people come to Christ, and we've been pouring into them. They've had classes on Old Testament and New Testament. We've basically formed it as we're a Christian hospital. It's important for you to know what it is that we're teaching, and so we teach them chronologically. What's the Old Testament, the New Testament, and there have been some great, great discussions and questions out of that, and some of them, I believe, are very open to the gospel. So we would love to see this class turn to Christ, and that would help as we hope to be a hospital that declares the gospel. This is Anna, one of our chaplains. She does a great job of keeping us updated on chaplain issues, and then she's also there with one of our other chaplains. We have a chaplain team that consists probably half of missionaries and half of Togolese people, and they make rounds every day in the hospital asking, can they pray for patients or their families? If they're allowed to, they pray. They also show the Jesus film twice a day in both wards, and then they also offer afterwards, do you have questions about what you've seen? They also go out to our cuisine area, which is an area where family members see. In Togo, there's no cafeteria in our hospital. So if you go to the hospital, somebody has to come with you, and they prepare all your meals and do some basic things for you. And so those people live in an area we call the cuisine, as well as surgery patients who no longer need to be hospitalized, but still need to be there every day for dressing changes. So it's a great place for ministry also, because our chaplains can go there and offer to pray once again for people, also to offer to do Bible studies. And they're kind of social workers on some levels, because many times they'll come back and say, you know, there's a family down there that I don't think they've eaten in a week. And so we have an opportunity then to also just show them love by, we kind of have a stash of rice and sauce and stuff that we haul down to families that are in deep need. And that's easier for a Togolese chaplain to sort out than it is for us. So it's a nice opportunity. This is actually Cindy, one of our other missionary friends, and she is showing the Jesus film at the cuisine. These are some ladies that have come to cook meals for somebody that's in the hospital, and so they're watching the Jesus film on her laptop. Village ministry. We get out to the villages every Thursday, and I was going Thursdays and Sundays. Thursdays, there's 2 villages I go to, and Sunday there's another village I go to with the village Bible studies with our chaplains. And so they're great times. You just kind of sit under a tree many times, and you talk through a Bible lesson. We have visuals we take out that show the story of hope, a chronological walk through the Bible. There's also many tools we use. Once we get to Jesus in the story of hope, many times we set up a screen on a night and announce it ahead of time, and we can have 5, 6, 7, 800 people show up to watch the Jesus film in these villages, and sometimes some of those people then return the next week for the Bible study. This is an interesting group because I took this photo. This young man right here was a man who had broken his leg. He had to have hardware put in his leg, and he was in the hospital for more than a month. But during that time, he heard about the story of hope. He watched the Jesus film, and he came to faith in Christ that was very real. And when he left, he said, you know, I want my family to know the same story. And that's most times how we get invited to villages. We don't go to villages unless we're basically asked to come. So he said, I can't ask directly, but could you come out and ask my father, who was in this little village, or it's a little compound area, if you can do a Bible study with our family, because I think our family really wants that. And so I went out there with Dudone, the chaplain. I think he should be in there. He's probably taking the picture, actually. And we went and we sat down with the men of the family. And as we sat with the men of the family, this man here translated, because they spoke Gam, which the chaplain, Dudone, does also. But he said, Dad, basically, I've asked these people out because something happened to me at the hospital that I want our family to learn about. And so then he turned it over to Dudone, and Dudone said, well, what we'd like to know is if you're willing to have us come and share with you what we believe, who we believe God is, and how we can know him. And this father, who's in his 80s, turns to his son here, and then to us, and he says, in Gom, all of my life, I have eaten things that make me sick or don't make me healthy. I feel like I'm still fading away, and I still feel sick. I want to eat something, I want to taste something that makes me feel well. And that was his way of saying, I want something different. What I've been doing all my life hasn't worked. And so we had an opportunity to go to this village and start a Bible study. And that's the first week, the people that gathered together as we did that Bible study. And so those are exciting moments. And when I'm sitting there in my office doing stupid entries in QuickBooks, saying, what did I become a missionary to do QuickBooks for? I remember my Thursdays and Sundays when I go to the villages, and the hospital ministry as a whole is making a huge difference. And it takes all of us doing sometimes roles we don't necessarily enjoy, but have to keep the place afloat because the tool itself is working. In this case, another tool we use, this is a radio. You can buy these for about $7 in our market. They take SD cards. You just stick your SD card in the side, and you can listen to whatever's on the SD card. We sell hundreds, if not thousands, of little SD cards with multiple tribal languages on them. So this is the Gom community. They would have bought the Gom SD card. It has the Jesus film on there. If they had a phone, they could put it in their phone and watch a Jesus film. It also has the entire Bible in Gom, and they can fast forward and go back. And so most times when we get there to do our chronological Bible study, we tell them what passage we're working through. They fast forward or go back until they find it. They play that in Gom on that radio, and then we do the lesson. It's really fun because this little Chinese-made radio here and cell phones, which are everywhere out there, are now tools that God is using to spread the gospel. And even since we've been back, we heard a story of a young man who had walked to 3 different countries looking for the Bible in his own language. This is not a digital version. He was looking for an actual Bible. And he talked about going over to, was it Nigeria? He was going to the other coast. Okay, so he'd come from Nigeria and was thinking about going to the coast. And when he saw someone out in front of our hospital reading a Bible, he asked them, where did you get that? And they said, well, the chaplains here, they have Bibles they sell. And he said, would they have my language? And he's like, I don't know, you can go try. And this is a grown man in full Muslim garb doing a happy dance in the chaplain's office. They said it was hilarious to watch because he's like, woo, like dancing around as he's holding this Bible that he'd heard existed but wasn't sure. So those are exciting moments also, just the way God's getting the word out. This is the church I mentioned that graduated from a small group to basically a full church. Started with just a Bible study for a man that had a surgery at our hospital. We meet monthly with the leaders, or what we call future leaders from each of these small groups, to try to train them in basic theological truths, who God is, so they can someday be leaders as well. And so once a month, we bring all of those to town, and we call them our men of peace, and we try to build into them so they can be future leaders in our future churches out there. Well, that's about it. That was a baptism service there. This is our pastor of a Christian church there in Mongo. This is Dudone, one of our chaplains. This is Benny, one of our nurses who's a Christian. And this is Ansien, one of our other chaplains. So a great group of people there. I think that's about all I have for today. We have a few minutes, right? We have 5 minutes left-ish? Or have I gone over? Is it 10:30-ish when my cutoff time? Or ish. So I want us to say, I'm not going to, do anything special. Do you have questions? No. He asked if all the tribal groups were Muslim. It's a great question. Basically, our whole area is coded as basically being Muslim, but many of the very small villages you find are animistic. And there's a few of the animistic groups, so there are people that worship spirits or ancestors, things like that. Some of those have now added the Muslim faith onto their animistic beliefs, but no, that's been a struggle because as a team we said our goal was to reach the Muslims for Christ. And honestly, our biggest impact is still in animistic people groups. However, one of our teammates said, well, you realize basically 2 or 3 years into this, all of those groups are Muslim anyway, because the Muslim church is bringing a lot of money in to build mosques and even these little tiny towns, sometimes drill wells, and sometimes these villages then, if you're at the mosque, you can use the well. If you're not, there's lots of stuff that goes on there. So for them to see us doing something for everyone, not just for Christians, not just for Muslims, has really swayed things, I'd say. So, yeah, many of the groups around us are either marginally Muslim or animistic as well. The city of Mongo itself, with 30,000 people, 98% Muslim, I would say.
Is Islam there more of the folk type of Islam than?
Yes. I would say yes with an asterisk. An hour and a half north of us, you get into some very, very strict Muslim areas where they come fully, you can't see anything on them. The women are completely covered, and it's a very strict area. But we have had, even in Burkina Faso, the country north of us, which has had terrorist issues, and ISA has been there. They've had a couple missionaries abducted. Even there, their chief imam for all of Burkina Faso came to our hospital, and it was quite for medical care, yeah. And so I think the Muslims have, in some ways in our town, the Muslims said, well, we have our own hospital now because they view the Hospital of Hope as partly theirs. And most of our employees are Muslim, but much of it is folk Muslim, yes. Yes, sir?
Seems like it's already integrated with them, so is there any resistance? It sounds like you're all pretty much together.
No, I think there's not a lot of resistance. Would you say there's resistance?
No, but if you become a believer, you could be kicked out. You won't be killed necessarily, but you could be kicked out of your house, which is when your family is your community, is your life, that's a big deal. So you can have some persecution, but I would say that it's not as strict as you would find up north.
There is some elements of it, as you mentioned. I have an employee we hired for a pharmacy, just a pharmacy technician. He was Muslim. He worked for us for 3-4 months, I think, and then declared, well, I've decided that I'm called to do my prayers every day, and so I have to be released to do prayers. And we don't allow that at the hospital because, I mean, you can do prayers, but you do it on your own time. You don't leave work because that would cause a huge problem. And you don't do it on our grounds because there's a mosque right across the way. And so when he came to us and said that, we found out basically there's a pretty strict Muslim group in town that was trying to make a point, and they were hoping that we would cave and say, yes, you can do your prayers, and then all of our employees could do that. And so instead I said, I'm sorry, we can't have you as an employee, and you have to leave. And I think it kind of shocked him, but we have not had that problem again. And we have had little things like that, like our Muslim employees. We love them. They're great people, but they will get together and say, you know, we're all going to go and pray at this certain time. And so we've had to say a few times, well, it's fine to do that, but even in the Quran, it says you can make up your prayers. You have to do that after work. And you definitely can't pray on the grounds. And so, yeah, there's nothing in the Quran that says they have to pray at that certain time. They can make up their prayers. So, yes, ma'am.
You said that you have a list of people who want you to come out and do Bible studies in the villages. What kind of workers do you need to meet that need?
Yeah, unfortunately, the biggest need we have, I say unfortunately because it's hard to find, is Christian Togolese who speak the heart languages of our northern area. So most of those are going to have to be people that come to the hospital, come to faith, develop their faith somewhat quickly, and then can go back to their villages and help reach there. Because the chaplains, like Dudone, who I go out with 2 days a week, he's busy 4 or 5 days a week going to different villages. And each of our chaplains are like that. They have certain villages they're responsible for, but they're pulled in so many directions. We don't want to burn them out, so we kind of say, this is the max, and after that, we have to put people on a waiting list, basically. So, I mean, it wouldn't hurt. We would love to have, I think, someone that came out that was full-time church planter, but honestly, without more people to disciple or work alongside, as far as Togolese people, it's our team's goal. Some people have done it differently, but our team has a goal of saying we never want one of the missionaries up front as the person preaching or teaching for our village ministries, because we don't want this to become the white man show where people come just because there's a white person there, but we want this to be something that is led by Togolese, for Togolese, with our support and our help. And so that's kind of our goal. Is that it? Did you find it mildly interesting? Did you learn anything new about Togo? A little bit? One question. He knew most of it. No, thank you guys very much. Thanks for having us. Thanks for your support of us. Thanks for the many years that you guys have poured into our ministry. Our family appreciates it, and it is making a difference in Togo at the Hospital of Hope.
Well, thank you, Ethan, for that presentation. It's really hard to sit there and watch all this because I'm thinking of Bangladesh the whole time, comparing, because there's so many similarities. And the sad thing is we had a lot of short-term Bangladesh people come out, short-term for doctors, and they all went to Togo instead. So I don't know. But there are so many similarities, and it's really neat to see what they're doing there. Really appreciate that, Ethan. Great. And he'll be speaking at our service right after this at 11:45, and so you're welcome to be here for that. So let's bow in a word of prayer. Our Father, we thank you for the ministry that's going on in Togo. We thank you for those 2 hospitals that are there. We thank you for the Blind Center also, and we thank you for the purpose of them being there is to get the gospel out to a very needy area of the world where we just learned that only 2% of the population there are Christian. And we ask, Lord, that you would continue to bless these ministries. And we pray that you would continue to be with the Molsees as they're on this furlough time, this home ministry time. We ask that you would use them in encouraging the churches, encouraging their friends, encouraging those that support them to continue to pray for them and support them in that vital work in that country. So we want to commit them to you. We pray that you would be with Ethan as he shares the word of God in our worship service, and so we want to commit that to you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Come and see what God